Hi there and welcome, I'm Zen and welcome to the second instalment of the Figma series. This one's going to be a little bit longer than I really want it to be because we've got to cover some very important basic ideas. We're going to create a project, we're going to create our first page and literally just create a page with no content, and we're going to go through the theory of it as well. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so as you can see, I've already got Figma open. I've already signed in as myself, and I've actually got no project. Now, to be honest, when you normally create an account with Figma, it does give you a default project to start with. It forces you to give it a name. I deleted it so I can show you how to create one from scratch. Now, when you normally start up, you'll actually be here in the drafts, okay? And actually these things here trying to help you understand how to use Figma, but that's what I'm here for you today. Now, below here, we can see your name again. In my case, it's Zeeks. This is the user that you've signed in as. But you'll also find your other teammates because Figma is actually meant for groups to work together. And so here you'd see other team members that you have access to the work, as well as the projects that you have access to of their work. Since I'm not attached to anybody else in this user, I've only got myself. See, even in Figma, I'm lonely. But the first thing I need to do is to create my first project. So I go up to the top right-hand corner where it says new project, and fun enough, I click the button. And I'm going to call this look around because, well, guess what? That's what I'm going to be doing. And then we create project. You think, great, now I can start getting into it. Look, I'm in this project here. Let's get going. Also, just to point out, you can go back up to seats here, or whatever your user is, and then you can create another project as well. So I'm just going to call this, what am I going to call this project? I'm going to call this Wild Side, and we'll see why later on. Okay, and we see now I've got two projects, Look Around and Wild Side, but neither of them have any files. Okay, so we go back to Look Around and we click on New File. And we go, oh, great, look, I'm in the editing area, brilliant, let's start with it. But one thing we're missing here, and this is called the actual page itself. This is our canvas, our working canvas, but we don't actually have the sheet, if you like, that we work on. And so that's what we need to do first. And so we go up to the top here to what looks like a picture frame. You might call it the hash symbol. It's called a pound symbol, but no worries. And we click on frame. You think, right, well, where is it? Where did it come? Nothing. And that's because it's got a lot of defaults for us, okay? You can see it for popular phones, tablets, desktops, watches, etc. We're going to be doing this on desktop, and you can see we've got loads of different resolutions. And this is one of the important subjects that we need to talk about, which will make this video longer than it should be. But let's just stick on desktop first. So we go for desktop, and we get this, okay? Now the other thing we're going to do is we're just going to go to here to the fill color, and we're going to make it a blue color. Let's make that, that's a nice blue. We'll use that. And there's a reason for this. As I said, one of the things we've got to decide is this width really correct? Is this the best width for us? The height, we're not worried about. We can extend or shrink the height as needed per web page. But the width is an important one. Now, before we go any further, a little bit of housekeeping. I hate this X and Y not being 0. Okay, so let's just correct that to 0. And I think this is just good practice, just general good practice to have it at 0, 0. I don't understand why Figma doesn't do that by default, but that's down to them. Okay, so we have that. We say, well, is this the right width? And this is really what we are looking at here. Is this the right width? Well, the first thing we can do is we can view it in a web browser. I know what you're saying. This is already a web browser, but as a web page. Okay, and you see the plus sign here. Well, actually, it's not plus sign, is it? It's the play sign. My apologies. It says present. When you click on that, it will actually put it in a web browser on its own without anything else. I strongly recommend you press the control button and then that, so it does it in a new tab. Okay, the reason for that is quite simply, it is a live view. If I just add a rectangle, okay, so we can see it there, I jump over, I can see it here straight away. And you can already see it's set at 100%. So this is what 1440 pixel size web page would look like if it was centered on my screen. And this is a 1920 by 1080 screen. So this is what it will look like on a full HD screen. And we can see, what is this width what we want it to be? Okay, is this as wide as I want it to be? Do I want it wider? Do I want it shorter? These are important questions to ask. The first thing I will say is that this will partly depend on who and what your website is for, because as much as we like making large websites so we can get really nice layouts, we have to admit that something like over 60% of web traffic is now through the mobile phones. And so designing it for a desktop may not always be the best solution, depending on what your target audience uses, okay? Which is why there were all those other values. The second thing is, even if you're doing it for desktop, you don't need to stretch it right across. This is something that I used to be guilty of for years. I calculated that the safest width that you can have, or the safest widest width you can have, was 1860 pixels. And that was to allow for the differences in scroll bars that browsers have, because the scroll bars on your browsers are different for each browser. Okay, there isn't a consistent scroll bar size. So by giving yourself about 60 pixels, it gave you enough space that you still took up most of the page, but weren't in any danger of causing issues with the scroll bar. Because if it was a bit too wide and the scroll bar appeared, you might end up having a horizontal scroll bar, which is a big no-no in web design. So one thing you should, like I say, the thing you got to decide is how wide you want it to be. And really, it is down to you. I mean, I would recommend that if you're looking for a desktop, 1440 is sort of like where the most common values are. Like I say, if you compare them to things like BBC News and other websites, they are roughly, this is the key word, roughly this width, okay? And so why is it only roughly this width? And well, the answer is quite simple. It all depends how you actually design your web page, okay? Because there are essentially three ways you can design your web page: using a grid system, putting everything very, structurally inside a grid. You can use a column-based system, or you can use a row-based system, okay? And they all have their own pros and cons, okay? In truth, if you're using the row-based system, which is quite common if you're looking at using CSS grids, which is definitely a level 3 and above system, and then the width of your web page, even though they've always got to be the same width, the actual width isn't such a big concern, because you're dealing with your content in your rows. So if you're looking at a grid or column-based system, where the width really does matter, because there's quite a bit of mass involved in this, and I'm just going to briefly show you this, okay? I say briefly, I appreciate I'm already about almost 10 minutes in, so let's see if I can show this to you nicely. So in order to do this properly, you have to make sure that you have the page itself. So this is called desktop 1 at the moment. We can rename it, okay? It's in here somewhere. And then when you look over here on the right hand side, we should find, there you go, layout grid. So I click on that, and I go for a +1, and you can see it's red. This is why I chose a blue one. I'm just going to click into it and make the color a bit stronger, okay, because it's quite a low one. There we go. So this is a 10 pixel grid, and if you're doing a page layout, maybe you want it that granular, but in reality, if you're doing a web page, that is too tight. Maybe 50 pixels would be more worthwhile, okay? Just try and lock that into place. Yeah, this is one of the annoying things about Figma. If you lock the page, you lock all the items inside it as well, and you can't move them. So you have to unlock. I wish there was a way, and there probably is, and I just don't know how to do it, where you can keep the desktop locked and only move the you know, it's children. But here we go. So this is the rectangle, and you know what you would therefore do in a grid system is to keep it, you know, within the grid. Makes sense. And this can actually help you make much more sort of logical looking web pages, because what you don't want is like, you know, one there with some text, you know, and then students, you've got another one here like this. You'll probably more naturally start to align them up together. Okay, or maybe you're going to do like a little bits of loads of little images, and therefore you can, you know, do one set there. Let's get this a bit right. There we go. And so you sort of keep within the same sort of rows or something like that. Okay. This grid, yes, you can use it for responsive design, but you know, if you're going to use these, you know, this huge number of grids, you know, widths, because it's only 50, you know, you really need to go something like 300 or something if you're going to try and make it more responsive. But it can be useful for certain things. The grid design is actually really handy if you're designing levels on a platform game or something. However, the column system is actually a lot better. So let me just go back to desktop. So I go to my grid, click on there, and there's a little drop down menu here, and I'm going to change this into columns. Now with the columns, we have the column width itself, as well as what is called the gutter. Okay, and yes, maybe that's where I came from, but you know, let's not worry about that. And the margin value as well is the outside. Okay, so it's whether or not you actually want it away from the walls, for example. But if you're making it so that your page is small enough that it's going to sit nicely inside of a web page, then you don't really need to worry about the margin. And this is when the maths really takes off a bit, because again, you can have these going across multiple columns. That's not a problem, but you really need to decide on how wide you want each column, how wide you want each gutter. Okay, now all the gutters should be the same width. Okay, so don't go, oh, I want 20 here, 10 here, 30 here. No, make sure all your gutters are the same, otherwise it's, well, actually in Figma they won't allow you to give individual gutters, I don't think. But this is when you need to start doing your maths. So, well, actually, you know, you can see here that if I just do this as a single column, I've got this right, yeah, it's X. You can see that this column is 272 pixels wide. That just seems a bit of a dumb number. Okay, I'm a big fan of where you can rounding things up. So maybe I want that at 280. Okay, or maybe run it down to 270. And then you got to look at your maths. But you say, well, okay, in this case it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. Okay, so let's make it easy. Let's say it's 250. Okay, so that'd be 5 columns at 250. It's 1250 pixels wide. But then I've got 4 gutters. Okay, maybe I want each gutter to be 20 pixels, which I think this is what it is by default. So that's 2, 4, 6, so that's 80. So it's 80 on top of my 1250, which makes it 1330. Feel free to use a calculator. Okay, so instead of it being 1440 pixels wide, we now want it at 1330. Okay, or you could have gone the other way, you know, 300 per column, 5 columns, that's 1500, 1580 when you include the gutters. You know, and you don't have to have 5 gutters. In fact, I personally recommend an even number of columns. And the reason for that is that if you are looking at doing responsive design, one of the great things you can do, let me just go back to desktop. So let me just put this into 6 columns. Okay, 6 is a really good number. I like the number 6 when it comes to columns, because when you're doing responsive design, you could say, well, okay, at a certain width, we're going to drop from 6 columns to 3 columns. Okay, or even from 6 to 4. Okay, or from 6 to 3, or any combination of that, 6 to 4 to 3 to 2, down to 1. And so you can see by having a column-based system allows you a great more level of flexibility when you're looking at responsive design. The one thing you have to make sure is that you keep your elements in your web page within those columns. Yes, they are allowed to span multiple columns. That is not a problem. What you don't want is like this one here, where it straddles part of one column and part of the other, but not fill them both up. That can be a bit messy. And the idea here is that by using the column system, you make your website look like it's more structured and more ordered. People also use the column system, more often than not use the golden ratio to set out the height. I will do a video on the golden ratio, and when that's done, that'll be in the description. But again, that is really a way of trying to get the right ratio of width and height for your elements. Okay, so more columns give you more versatility, but when you're starting off, don't overdo it. You know, stick between 6 and 8. Because again, 8's another good number. You know, 8, 4, 2, 1 is a perfect example of being able to create, you know, different, the same web page in different styles for different different users, different devices. And with that, I'll go on to the next important thing, which is once you've worked out how wide you want your web page, how wide you want each column, how big you want each gutter. Okay, how do you, once you've started putting all your stuff together, how do you create another page? Okay, and the easiest and the way that I recommend is literally at the top here, just select brand new page. Okay, and then you can flip between them. You still have to create a brand new frame like we did before. Okay, and you'll still need to put it at 0, 0 because of the fact of the way that they do things on Figma. Okay, now that's not the only way that you can do it. It's the way that I recommend that you do it, because you can also rename these pages. Okay, so there you go, rename. We might call this the home page, for example. Once I've learnt to spell, we'll call it the home page. Okay, so we'll call it the home page, and this might be, I don't know, about us, or about me, whatever you want to call it. Okay, now the reason why I recommend doing it this way is simply because if you are looking at doing responsive designs, one of the things you can do is when we zoom out a bit, so in this we can do control and use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. There's nothing stopping us from adding another frame. Okay, and again, what we'll do this time is, so what this one's actually for the iPad mini, and we can put it next to it there. Okay, I would still recommend that you get the Y value to 0. Obviously the X value can't be, because if it's 0, 0, it's going to be the same point here. And so what I would do is that on this particular page, that this will be my home page for the desktop, and this will be my layout for the home page for the, in this case, the iPad mini resolution. Maybe I'll do another one for the mobile phone next to it, and so on and so forth. And that I find is a much better use of doing it. Okay, some people will just do like page 1 here and do page 2 next to it here. The problem with that is, like I said, is that then you can't see a direct comparison between your desktop and your mobile versions. The big no-no that people do, and I need to point this out, is that rather than creating a new frame, what they will do is just create a rectangle and say, well, that's my page, and now I'm going to fill this rectangle with other stuff. Okay, I'll just change it to different colors so we can see it. And the problem with this, and there's a big problem with this, is that our X and Y coordinates are completely messed up. And it's very important that our X and Y coordinates are correct, especially if you're doing, like I said, you know, the BTEC, the level, you know, the BTEC first, level 2 GCSE style things, where we're probably going to be using absolute positioning. We need to make sure our X and Y values are correct. Okay, and here now we've got this really weird value of minus 688. And if you try to use that value on a web page, this item is going to be off the screen. You won't be able to see it, and you won't be able to see anything. And this is why it's a bad idea. But when you use this as a frame, and I'll just show you this as if it was a frame. So I'll bring this iPad mini over here instead, and I then put a rectangle onto this one. Okay, you'll notice it's not a minus number, because Figma is intelligent enough to realize that this frame, okay, that the elements inside this frame, and notice how this rectangles inside here. There's another thing people accidentally get wrong is, you know, like they've got this rectangle and they drag it over. Oh, it's gone behind, so we just move it up. Okay, but the problem is that it's still attached to this one. It's got the dimensions and the positioning based on the desktop, not on the iPad mini. So please don't do that. You can do some copying. Oh, where's it gone? It's completely disappeared now. I think it somehow moved. There you go. So the idea is that because we've created it while we're on here, these coordinates are now based on it. We can see that because I moved it up to the top left hand corner, 0, 0. Okay, so this is what's a really nice idea about using the frames. And again, next to it is that we still keep all our values correct. Okay, the X and Y values are perfect. But like I said, if we try and do it using just doing a square here, we can see that these values are completely out, and it means it just does not help us at all. So please don't do that. Okay, if you're gonna do a desktop and like your mobile phone version or whatever, make sure you're using the same frames. Okay, I've spoken for a long time. I say these sort of things are important. I cannot stress how important it is making sure that you set your web page correct at the start, that you understand how wide you want your columns to be and stuff like that. Like I said, if you're looking at doing a grid, a CSS grid layout, the actual width isn't as important because you can change the number of columns per row as we're going along. And so we'll look at that in the more in-depth videos later on. But even with that, I would still advise you to try and keep to some sort of column design because it just looks neat. It looks more professional. Okay, that's it for this video, and hopefully it's been helpful. In the next video, we're going to look at color codes, which is quite a big topic, but I'm not going to go into a huge amount of theory. I'm just going to show you a few nice little tricks that we have on Figma. Okay, so as always, please do your like, subscribe, ring that bell, all that jazz, put in a comment, make me feel like I've got friends, and I'll see you in the next episode. This is Zen signing out.